Anyone who's played a Halo game knows that above all else, the series is about creating a fun, interesting, and diverse sandbox to play with. Halo 2 took the first game's foundation and solidified it into something truly iconic. So the question is, can we make it even better? Hey, what's up? I'm making a mod called Halo 2 Rebalance, and today we'll be diving into the innovations Halo 2 made to its roster of guns, and what we can learn from it to further fine-tune and polish the whole gameplay experience to be even more engaging, rewarding, and most of all, fun. Make sure you're subscribed if not already, hit the like button, and head over to my Patreon. When it comes to making a fun first-person shooter, the first thing anyone will tell you is that your gun should feel beefy, crunchy, and satisfying to shoot. But beyond that, how do you craft a loop of engaging dynamic gameplay which keeps itself fresh throughout the whole runtime? The obvious answer, of course, would be ensuring all of your tools are fun and useful, but how do you go about achieving that exactly? Balancing such a big sandbox like Halo's is a tricky job, especially if you're Bungie and have to account for both single and multiplayer. And when making a mod such as this, it's all too easy to misinterpret the intentions of the developers. And in pursuit of making all weapons useful, you end up flattening the entire sandbox by making every weapon effective at too many different things, ironically resulting in player choices having less impact on the gameplay. The trap here is viewing imbalance as something inherently bad. To quote Halo design lead Jamie Griesmer, "When a weapon is being used as intended, it should feel overpowered, so most imbalances come from using a weapon outside its role. And that's the key. Roles equals fun. Roles create defined structures for players to navigate, calling on them to learn about and experiment with a huge roster of options, to discover what each one is best at, allowing every weapon to feel unique and special in its own way. If a weapon utterly dominates in its intended niche, that's a good thing. Problems only arise if a weapon's balance overextends its usefulness to the point of overshadowing other options and undermining their strengths, or inversely if a weapon isn't even effective in filling its intended use in the first place. If you can build and maintain a giant sandbox and carve out meaningful roles for all the toys within it, that can make for unique experiences for each and every player who all find their own ways to overcome the same challenges. So let's take this philosophy and see how we can reapply it to Halo 2's sandbox, fine-tune it for the single-player experience, and maximize the fun. Halo 2 marked the debut of the battle rifle, a weapon very emblematic of how Halo 2 evolved its sandbox in general. To understand exactly how, let's rewind back to the first Halo game. Again, after Halo 1 released, Bungie noticed that the pistol was incredibly popular among players. They originally intended for the assault rifle to be your primary go-to, with the pistol being more of a sidearm. But in part thanks to a last-minute patch by project lead Jason Jones, the pistol ended up becoming very powerful and very prevalent, capable of killing other players with 2+1 shots to the head. So coming to Halo 2, they decided to accept and adapt the way players were having fun with their game, and then set about changing how the weapons were presented to be more in line with how they were being used. They literally took the pistol's weapon tag and changed its model to be that of a rifle instead, one which artist Robert McLeese designed to look like the smarter, more useful cousin of the assault rifle. Yeah, you can just look at that bitch and tell he doesn't have a degree. They then changed the assault rifle to instead be a submachine gun. This left a void for a proper sidearm, resulting in the creation of the decidedly weaker M6C Magnum. In practice, the assault rifle in Halo CE functioned as your basic, easy-to-use weapon, while the pistol functioned as the precise utility weapon that rewarded skillful aim above all else. In noting the pistol's popularity and following the fun, Bungie honed in on this type of precision-centric gameplay and moved forward with that in mind when designing Halo 2's sandbox. The SMG remained in the AR's role as your most basic, first-tier tactic, easy to use and innately cathartic in its wide, rapid spray, but with limited utility. Games will introduce obstacles resistant to your baseline tactics to push you into the broader sandbox and consider the other options available to you, learn their specific strengths, and in Halo's case, encourage and reward use of its more difficult weapons. And that's where the battle rifle comes in, whose precision inherently calls for more delicate use, rewarding you with the highly applicable utility of one-shotting unshielded foes. But because it really only shines in that one important but narrow utility, the game continues to push you into combining arms to cover its weaknesses, like draining shields with plasma first, eliminating key targets with the sniper or needler to alleviate pressure, or using explosives to deal with heavy armored threats. The biggest difference between Halo 1 and 2's design priorities was they deliberately chose to optimize Halo 2's sandbox for multiplayer PvP combat. Quote, assuming you're working on a game that has both single and multiplayer, you should balance the multiplayer first. Multiplayer balance is very unforgiving. Live opponents will exploit any loopholes. The AI in single player are a lot more flexible and malleable, so the balance doesn't need to be as precise. And of course, we all know how it turned out in the end. The explosive success of Halo 2 thanks to this balancing philosophy speaks volumes alone. So let it be said that given the context and crunch the game was made under, the designers definitely made the right calls in the areas of gameplay that mattered most. Hindsight is 20/20, and so it's easy to identify areas where things could have been improved. Here's what I mean. When it comes to the Halo 1 pistol, its popularity wasn't just a result of being powerful and useful, but because it had a more notable learning curve to master, in leading its slower projectile and the relatively lower bullet magnetism. And because of that, it felt more rewarding to land that precise, killing headshot. In making its successor, the battle rifle, much more generous with headshots, it becomes more accessible to use, but you potentially diminish that rewarding, skillful aspect that can make a utility weapon special, which also verges on overshadowing the very purpose of the easier tools like the SMG. And so in keeping with the philosophy that rolls equals fun, my approach is to ensure that both of these weapons effectively fulfill their intended roles, and to then apply that same scrutiny to every other piece of this vast sandbox. Halo 2 buffed the projectile speed of human weapons to be near instant, so let's tone that down to be more in parity with Halo 1, so there's a bit higher degree of skill involved in landing headshots on fast-moving targets. For the battle rifle, the first thing we'll do is lower its bullet magnetism by a bit to demand a bit more deliberate precision to land that sweet one-shot kill. Likewise, and I'm gonna blow your mind with this one, it's important that a precision weapon actually reward precision. The campaign's version of the BR has a bad habit of missing headshots entirely, where that one burst can mean the difference between life and instant demise at the hands of one snipey boy. It's important that players are encouraged to close the gap with enemies, so while we shouldn't make it dead-on accurate, we can tighten the accuracy of each burst's first shot to make the weapon consistently reward dead-center red reticle headshots. In making the BR harder to use but with more consistent results, we can better channel what made the Halo 1 pistol so fun, and thus make for a more skillful, rewarding weapon. Flipping things around, we circle back to the SMG. Compared to Halo CE's assault rifle, it struggled to effectively fill the niche it should be best at, which is mowing through crowds of fronts, i.e. your first base tier tactic being effective against what should be base tier enemies. So let's retune the SMG's stats closer to that of Halo 1's AR, allowing it to tear through basic mobs, and consequently better teach players early on that getting in close and playing fast is just as important a tactic to master as hanging back and picking off from range. The SMG also became the poster child for Halo 2's biggest innovation, dual-wielding. Using two weapons at a time, trading your melee and grenades for increased firepower. I don't know how much of a hot take this is, but dual-wielding is a feature which I believe to be the single best innovation Halo can make to its formula, even if it never reached its full potential. Despite the added challenges it brings when balancing a sandbox, dual-wielding complements all of Halo's core strengths like butter on bread. It further bolsters that sandbox-driven gameplay of learning weapon strengths and weaknesses, to combine them together for the situation, literally in this case. Many returning weapons from Halo CE like the plasma pistol, rifle, and SMG, assault rifle, saw their stats nerfed, and many fans ascribed this downgrade to balancing out dual-wielding. While that was likely a factor, I think the much bigger catalyst for these nerfs was the decrease Halo 2 made to player vitality. In any case, how do we reap all the potential benefits to the gameplay without sacrificing the integrity of the weapons on their own? My answer? By tuning weapons around single wield first, dual wield second. Much like what we've done with the SMG, once a weapon has been optimized for its intended role single-wielded, we can then fine-tune its performance when dual-wielded. The best methods being, first, carefully control how a weapon's damage scales when firing both at once, to find a sweet spot. And likewise second, widen the dual firing spread with a faster ramp-up time to that spread. So in order to take advantage of that increased firepower, you need to get up close and personal with the enemy and play fast-footed. Or alternatively, temper your trigger finger by firing one at a time, which will preserve their base accuracy. With all these tuning considerations, we can better assure that weapon rolls remain intact on their own, and that dual-wielding can shine as a pure benefit to Halo's sweet, sweet sandbox dynamics. While talking about dual wielding, that brings us back to Halo 2's Magnum. Its role in vanilla pretty much starts and ends with making it behave like a real-life pistol, which turns out isn't enough to carve a meaningful niche in Halo Sandbox. So how does one go about tuning what is essentially a brand new weapon like this? Well, let's first establish a purposeful role for it. It's the single fastest firing headshot weapon, but one which lacks scope, intended for use up close where headshots are easier to land. Meaning by its very nature, it's nominally harder to use than the SMG, but easier to use than the battle rifle. So let's proceed with that in mind. A headshot weapon should always reward dead-on precision within the desired range. So let's buff its awful vanilla accuracy to instead consistently reward headshots where it performs most naturally, while also giving it a more fitting baseline of damage than vanilla, allowing it to have notably higher damage per second than the BR, while creating a unique dual-wielded role, having the highest accuracy out of all other dual firing options, allowing you to go akimbo and spend both mags to quickly eliminate key targets from a safe distance. But consequently, the weapon needs to reload more often than any other small arm, so it's less suited to crowd control. Then, what if we delayed introducing the battle rifle? I'm quite a fan of how Halo 3 and Reach's burst missions acclimate you to the basics of the sandbox, where it starts you out with only the assault rifle and magnum, i.e. your basic first-tier options, holding off a bit before giving access to the pivotal utility weapons. So I think saving the BR's introduction for later in Cairo Station will not only give the player a chance to learn the importance of headshots thanks to the Magnum's ease of use, but also allow much more ample emphasis early on to dual wielding, with room to learn about how the mechanics work and a great way to learn about weapon synergy. This goes to show how designing sandbox roles isn't just about how effective they are in a vacuum amongst one another, but also how they can contribute to a game's pacing and teach players about all the various mechanics. In the first episode, we went over the importance of the plasma pistol and plasma rifle, and how their unique functions and difference in projectile speeds called on the player to react differently depending on the foe they were facing, allowing the combat flow to constantly shift between offensive and defensive play. So since in this mod the player is no longer made out of glass, we can restore the key traits of these two pivotal weapons back to their status of the first game. We can buff the plasma pistol's standard shot and overcharge back to actually deal relevant damage to flesh, and increase the plasma rifle projectile's initial velocity back up, so it can refill its role of being the most accurate and consistent rapid-fire option among small arms. This will also allow elites to feel like more of a pertinent threat, without simply aimbotting you to death in 7 shots. In making these distinctions to the plasma pistol and rifle, it opens up many more potential dynamics all these weapons can have when combined through dual wielding. Here's an example of how something like the story can also inform sandbox roles, namely the weapons that exist as 2 peas in a pod, the battle rifle and carbine, and the sniper and beam rifles. Say what you will about supposed sandbox redundancy, but these similar weapons are purely a consequence of Halo 2 boasting many more Covenant-centric missions, which feature almost no human weapons. And so during these levels, to retain what Bungie felt were the most fun parts of the game, they created the carbine to fill the role of your headshot utility weapon, and the beam rifle to fill the role of your sniper. Knowing that, I think it's safe to say that Halo 2's redundancy is ultimately something that resulted in a better game than if these weapons didn't exist at all. That said, it's even better if you can still find ways to keep these weapon counterparts distinct to one another, because there are several missions where these weapons constantly overlap and coexist at once. So let's leave the battle rifle as is. The carbine being single shot is naturally harder to land headshots with than being a 3-shot burst, so without upsetting its role as the Covenant mission's precision weapon, let's lean into that a bit more and lower its projectile speed to require a bit more target leading. Then, as is typical with Covenant weaponry, we'll make it do more damage to sentinels than bullets, and a lot more damage to thick energy like jackal shields, changing how you fight certain enemies compared to the BR. For the sniper and beam rifle, let's follow that same guiding principle, making the beam rifle capable of depleting thick shields and pierce elite shields to kill with 1 less shot per rank compared to the sniper. Then, let's play further into the sniper rifle's heavy-duty masculine aura and do more body shot damage, blowing apart lower infantry and flood combat forms, where in their case, the beam rifle will more stay true to the principle of a sniper doing almost nothing to them. Furthermore, we'll give the sniper rifle the capability to pierce vehicle armor and chip at the driver's health, giving it a small but notable role there. We can use all these small distinctions to culminate into clear and notable differences between these weapons, which you can actively play towards and use to your advantage. To see the impact Halo 2's crunch had on the sandbox, we need look no further than the second Sentinel Beam and the Brute Plasma Rifle, merely existing as more powerful reskins of their counterparts. So let's apply the same method here. We'll leave the default Sentinel Beam alone. For the Eliminator Beam though, let's first give it a more readable color difference. Then, how's about we reach into the Rebalance Vault and redesign it to behave entirely unique from its counterpart? Since the Sentinel captains are of a higher rank swarming the ring's quarantine zone, let's design their weapon to fittingly crowd control Flood with sharp, cold efficiency, charging up and automatically zeroing in on targets within your view, where it's up to you to guide the laser and make the most of each burst, turning the Eliminator Beam into more of a short-term use power weapon, where every instance of its use needs to be carefully considered, especially when chased from multiple angles. With the addition of the new enemy and the brutes, they also came with their own weapons to establish their presence and character, one being the distinctive brute shot, the other being the brute plasma rifle. Once afforded the time come Halo 3, Bungie would later flesh this concept out into something unique in the Spiker. While it's definitely a product of time crunch, I've always preferred to approach each Halo game on their own terms as released. So in deciding to keep the brute plasma rifle, a makeover was in order. Luna cooked up an awesome new design, giving it its own character compared to the standard plasma rifle. The BPR is only introduced in the last 4 missions of the game, so it effectively serves as a late-game addition that keeps the gameplay fresh. Yet, despite that, this weapon ironically has next to no meaningful application within the gameplay context of these last 4 levels. The brutes become your primary adversary in Halo 2's last act, and they are very tanky, resisting small arms damage to boot. The BPR, as it stands, can't really respond to that. It ain't much better versus Vanilla's spongy-ass Flood either. Recall the purpose of the carbine and beam rifle, filling the void left by the absence of important weapons. When looking at Halo 2's last few missions, the SMG becomes extremely scarce, which served as your go-to for dealing high DPS up close. What does all this surrounding context tell us? To me, the brute plasma rifle is screaming to have its DPS buffed. And like, yeah, duh, a coked up version of the plasma rifle should obviously do more damage in a short amount of time, but what's most important is it needs to be capable of dishing out real damage in lieu of the SMG and its flesh-piercing capability, and capable of suppressing brutes, contending with their large pools of health. It'll also allow the game to continue encouraging close-range engagement, which, by extension, will allow brutes ample opportunity to convey and play into their trademark aggressive strength. So what route should we take to achieve this then? Well, let's leave its damage alone and instead further increase the BPR's max rate of fire, so it's more effective in gunning down crowds at close range. Let's then keep the weapon's accuracy and projectile speed accordingly low, to be clear that it's best used in closing the gap and rushing down foes. To offset this increase in lethality, we can make it more unwieldy in needing to temper its overheat and make it shorter-lived in its use. We'll have the battery drain faster, and in conjunction with this, we'll employ a mechanic rarely seen much in Halo, and make the rate of fire drop off the lower the gun's battery life, becoming significantly harder to use at very low charge. I feel like this is exactly the type of tampering brutes would make when appropriating elite technology, maximizing its damage output at the cost of literally everything else. Hopefully this can result in the brute plasma rifle dominating in late-game close-quarters rushdowns, with the unique twist of managing ammo to maintain that fast lethality. All of this shows how weapon rolls can be informed by how early or late a tool is introduced in the game, and how that tool should complement enemies the player faces. Halo 2 Rebalance gives lots of love to every piece of the sandbox, all weapons being given tweaks and adjustments to fulfill their roles more effectively in a single-player context. The shotgun's pellets per shot have been boosted from 10 to 15 like all other Halo games, which also no longer disappear beyond 10 feet, and has a much snappier reload animation thanks to Echo 4A2, allowing you to play more fast and loose, much like the frenetic shotgun combat of Halo 1. The Needler's projectile has been sped up to more consistently reward focused fire on single targets, and by that same logic, its magazine size has been reduced to de-emphasize reckless spray and pray. Its tracking has also been retuned to be properly dodgeable via strafing. The plasma grenade has had its anti-shield attribute restored from Halo 1, meaning it's once again capable of one-shotting most elite ranks, albeit the radius it'll strip shields has now been made smaller than the base explosion, so there's greater importance to precise placement and timing. For another example of how crunch impacted the gameplay, let's take a look at another piece of the Golden Triangle: melees. Halo 2 was originally planned to have melee combos where consecutive hits would stack into a more powerful final blow. For one reason or another, this feature was cut, and the traditional slower melee system remained. Yet Halo 2 still contains some remnants of this combo system, with repeated melees increasing in damage. This tells me melee damage was never formally retuned, as is plainly evident in game where Chief and Arbiter bludgeon bad guys with all the mighty force of a pool noodle. So I've retuned melees more akin to Halo 3 to deal damage much closer to what you'd expect, and to properly reward the tactic of pushing in close to deliver that finishing blow. Those who have played Halo CE Rebalance will know that I gave certain weapons noticeably higher melee damage to appropriately reflect their distinctly more lethal looking animations. So naturally, I've carried those same adjustments forward into Halo 2. Thanks to Mindful Moron and Echo 482, the Needler's melee animations have been overhauled to swipe with the needles once again and allow for this change. Likewise, heavy weapons like the rocket launcher now sport high melee damage with unique, fitting reactions from dudes on the receiving end of the big bonk. So, in conclusion, rolls equals fun, among many other things. In remaining cognizant of weapon rules and further making all of the different options distinct, we can make every tool of destruction feel powerful and useful to reflect both the player's mental strategy and mechanical skill, thus creating a more rewarding decision-forward sandbox that capitalizes on Halo's greatest strengths. Halo 2 Rebalance is only made possible with your support to the channel and my Patreon, so consider heading over there if you'd like to see more Halo mods and early access to video deep dives like this. Halo 2 may be among Bungie's most flawed titles, but Halo's greatest sandbox strengths still shine through yet, helping it to succeed in spite of the hellish time crunch, and to further build the series into what we know it as today. Now, back I go into my dark little modding cave. Peace out and see you next time.